I'm John Motley. I'm a past president of the Amistad Center for Art and Culture and a past president of the Wadsworth Atheneum Museum of Art. Here you see some of the Amistad Center's collection of military images. For over 50 years, I've collected the art and artifacts of African Americans. Being a Vietnam veteran, I decided to concentrate on commemorating the history of blacks in the United States military. I've shared them with the Amistad Center, the American Civil War Museum in Richmond, Virginia, of which I am a past chairman, and other institutions to preserve the art and history of African Americans. Here you see a sculpture of Corporal Clinton Greaves, born enslaved in Virginia in 1855 and enlisted in the 9th U.S. Cavalry in 1872. He was sent west with other black soldiers for several reasons: to rid the southern states of black soldiers after the Civil War as part of a corrupt bargain made during Reconstruction, and to support America's western growth through construction projects and military action against Native Americans. Greaves is remembered as an iconic Buffalo Soldier, a respectful reference by Native Americans for the ferocity of these soldiers in combat against them, to their majestic hair, and to the buffalo skin coats many wore for warmth. Buffalo Soldiers were the generation of late 19th and early 20th century regiments made up of black men, officered almost entirely by whites. Regrettably, their service did not result in securing equal rights and opportunity for African Americans. While visiting Denver for a convention a quarter of a century ago, I saw a photo of this Ed Hamilton sculpture. I purchased this piece on the spot and recently donated it to the Amistad. I was attracted to the statue because of its stark imagery of a brave black soldier, the rare Medal of Honor recipient, and to the historical significance of the unknown role that black soldiers played in the expansion of this country. We are about to hear from Connecticut veterans on the truth about war and the experience of black Americans in the military as they left their families, during their service, and upon their return. Veterans that so deserve to be honored and to be heard.
I grew up on the south side of Chicago, born in 1945. And it was a wonderful, blessed community. That whole old proverb, "It takes a village to raise a child," really had its reality, its truth in where I grew up. We were taught that we were bright and good and intelligent and worthwhile. Right after high school, I went to college, and while in college, I took ROTC. And because while in high school, I'd taken ROTC, and my brother was at West Point, so the idea of the Army, even during this time of the 60s, even though I had been arrested in 1963, following the example of Dr. King and protesting against the ugliness that marked the very beauty of what America was supposed to be, nonetheless, I loved America. I loved this country that could have been what it wasn't, but I felt that it could be if I would do what I could do. And as I was taking the different tests, it was suggested I join the military intelligence. We would go to places where we could intercept communication between different armies, different units, to see where they were, to find out where they were stationed, to find out where their armies were, and if it was necessary, and if it was a country or people we were at war with, we'd send it in and they would be destroyed. That's not a happy part of what I did, but it is what my role was. And the heavy part was seeing human beings, God's creation, God's created beings, being treated by other of God's created beings as if they were nothing. And to be on the side of those who treated others as nothing weighed heavy. And so if anything is taken away from people who go through war, is the disappointment and who they discovered and what they discovered they were capable of. And every night to dream about that. When I finally got out of the Army, and I hadn't been home for years, I mustered out of Fort Lewis, Washington, and flew into Chicago. I stood there in my uniform with my duffel bag, and no cab would stop for me. They just went right around me, and I kept waving and stood there. And finally a cop, a white cop, saw what was happening. He went out in the street and he stopped a taxi and said, "Come here, soldier, this is yours." Got in the cab and the cop said, "You know, it's not only your uniform, but that you're a Negro, that they wouldn't stop." Guy apologized. So all that time in the service, still, this country was what it was. Like I think I came to the point that I realized there was nothing I could do that would make me a full American.
I was born in 1946 on Windsor Street, 312 Windsor Street in Hartford. And my father came from Cape Verde Islands and came to America in 1900. And I was the 9th child, and he was 65 when I was born, and my mother was 47. And I don't think anybody in the family expected another child coming in the house, because my sister said when she came home from school, she saw a head in the bed with a lot of hair, and she thought it was a man. My oldest brother, Sam, he had joined the Marines, so he was in the Korean War. And then when he came home, he had his dress blues on. And I said, that's what I'm going to be, a Marine, when I grow up. When I finished Prince Tech, I signed up for the Marines right away because I knew I would probably get drafted and I didn't want to go in the Army. And I had to be a Marine. Then they told us we were going Westpac, and we're like, what's Westpac? They said, you're going to Vietnam. I'm going, okay, we'll go to Vietnam. And I'm getting off the plane, and I'm looking across the airstrip, and I said, hey, Sarge, what's all those silver things over there? He said, they're coffins. And I said, for who? He says, there's a big push up north. He said, we expect a lot of bodies. And I said, man, I said, I hope I'm not going north. And I got my orders. It says, you're going to Dung Ha. I said, where's that? The guy said, it's north. When we were at Jilin and seeing these Marines, and you couldn't, you see these guys operate, boy, I mean, they're just going, their rounds are coming in, and they're fighting back, shooting rounds back. You know, they're hollering and screaming, you know, we're all dirty, we're nasty, no shirts on, trousers all brown, you know. We went 56 days without a wash-up, 56 days, you know, and these guys hanging in there, captains hanging in there, and we're drinking and shooting, you know, it was wild. And that was like a movie to me, you know. All these guys are heroes, you know. And these guys, they, a lot of them didn't make it.
The middle of 3 children, a very loving, close family. It was important that we all had dinner together each night. Mom and Dad worked really long and hard to put two of us through college, my older sister and myself. My younger sister decided she did not want to go to college, and she is equally successful as we are. I was accepted and received an Army scholarship to go to medical school. So medical school was paid for in addition to a stipend for living. My wife is also a physician. She's a pediatrician. She was also an Army scholarship recipient. We had our first child before I started internship and residency, which was 4 years for me. 2 weeks after starting my new job, I recall this so distinctly. There was about 7 of us that was called to the hospital commander's office. He said, "Gentlemen, it's not a matter of if or when, it's a matter of for how long you will be gone." And literally 2 weeks after that, I was on a plane to Daman, Saudi Arabia. I knew deep down on that contract that I signed when I got the scholarship several years ago that there was fine print. And no one twisted my arm to take the scholarship. But, you know, this was real. That's a picture before I left, my daughter and I. My wife would send a picture and write something on the back from my daughter, and that was her Christmas present to Daddy in 1990. "Dear Daddy, thanks for your letter about you and the bad guys." She's talking to my wife who wrote this. "I know you are okay, and I'm not worrying too much. I tell Matthew," that's our little boy who was born, "not to worry too. I miss you so much, Daddy. Please come home soon." We used to look at the stars each night. We'd say our prayers. We'd look at the stars each night. That was our routine. And she wrote, "Remember the stars." My son was born at the time I was deployed, so I didn't see him for the first 5 months of his life. So I was sent over with a maneuver battalion, a tank maneuver battalion. I was in a medical support group. I distinctly recall the night I was probably most fearful was during the ground war, when our unit, which was traveling really quickly behind the tanks, when we crossed over into occupied Iraq. And we were told to put our full MOPP gear on, including our masks, because they didn't know, excuse me, if there was any chemical weapons. Most of what we did was during the night, but during the day you couldn't tell the difference from night because the skies were completely blackened from the oil fields that were destroyed. It was time for me to decide what I wanted to do. I was a lieutenant colonel at the time, and my wife looked at me and said, "Jeff, you can be a colonel and you can be single, or you can be a husband, father, and you served proudly, you can leave the Army." And I chose the latter of those two.
I was born in North Carolina to my mom, who was a teen mom. My mom moved to Hartford, Connecticut with myself and my sister. My mom had been a community activist for a long time, so I think that I just got the community fever. I wanted to do something that was more than just go to work and get a paycheck. So one of my high school friends and I decided that we would join the military. So she joined the Army, I joined the Air Force. My stepfather was in the Army, my dad was in the Marines, and my friend went to the Army, so I wanted to go somewhere that they didn't go. So I said, okay, I'm going to the Air Force. You know, coming from a community where there was not a lot of real structure, moving into the military where everything was structured, it was definitely a culture change. It was in the time when women were not really getting a lot of jobs, you know, into the military, because there were jobs that men could do, jobs that women could do. There was no women on the front lines. So that was not an option for women at that time. I had one really, really bad experience I had when I was in the military, and I got an assignment to the flight line. And the flight line was a place where predominantly men worked. There was not a welcoming experience just because I was a woman. So I don't know if it was because I was a black woman or just because I was a woman, period, and they felt like I had infiltrated into the flight line. So it was not a good 3 years that I spent in Germany in that location. I was a drill instructor for 15 years because it definitely had a definite impact on my life. So when I became a sergeant, then I said, okay, I'm going to become a drill sergeant so I can have the same effect on other people's lives, because the military had definitely, made a change in my life, and I figured that I could pass that on to others. So, and I found that very challenging, but very rewarding, because you get to see them when they come in the door, and then you see them when they leave out. And then one of the things that was my ultimate goal was make sure that the last person who at least succeed was able to succeed. I think my proudest moment was when I graduated from the NCO Academy, the Non-Commissioned Officer Academy, because I was the only black woman in my class that was a distinguished grad, and that was really, really an accomplishment for me, because there was so many, things tugging at saying that it couldn't be done. I came back in 2000 to retire after a 24-year military career, which led into walking right into politics. So how I thought I was going to come and retire at the age of 43, okay, that was a dream. That lasted for like about a minute.
I'm a born and raised Hartfordite. My family is from Georgia. My parents, grandparents came here to get away from segregation and to find meaningful work. My family was the first black family on Cleveland Avenue. So all my neighbors, I learned about Hanukkah from my next door neighbor, my best friend. Most of my classmates were Irish, Jewish, and Italian. And it wasn't until when I graduated from Weaver, and all my friends many of my friends decided they were going to go off to college, I thought I was just tired of school. And you're young, I figured I could conquer the world. I said, you know what? I think I'll go into service. That'll give me time to think about what I want to do. And so I enlisted. When we finally landed in Vietnam, I just remember looking out the window, and it's like beachy. It's like going to the beach. I mean, it was sand. And I'm looking, I'm like, this may not be too bad. In 1966, I was chasing my girlfriend, who was now my wife, around a dance at Weaver High School. And a year later, I was chasing the 66th North Vietnamese Army Regiment, Rocket Regiment in the Central Highlands of Vietnam. I'm 11 Bravo, infantry, combat infantry. That was our job. Find, engage, eliminate. And I was in the Central Highlands, so I was up in the mountains. I never, when they was training us, all you heard was Viet Cong, Viet Cong, Viet Cong. I never engaged with VC. I engaged with North Vietnamese Army regulars. These boys was bad, and we were both trying to do the same thing, kill each other. I can remember when I was in my worst moments in that jungle, and I didn't think I could make it another day. I remember I could take my M16, turn it on its side, and look at the magazine housing where it had stamped Colts Firearms, Hartford, Connecticut. And just seeing Hartford, Connecticut would lift my spirits, and to just give me another day to kind of grind it through to get back home. And then to get home and see what had happened, it was hard. Since Dr. King got assassinated, there's been riots. As I went down Main Street and I looked at the devastation that had taken place, it was still taking place. It was almost surreal to me. And I see this group of young hippies. And when I crossed that street, they got behind me. And it was baby killer. You should have died over there. And it just, and I'm hearing it, but I'm just keep walking, just keep walking. I don't want any problems. After all of what, not only I, but we all went through over there, I get it. There's people that don't like war. I don't like war. I didn't ask to go to Vietnam. They sent us to Vietnam. And to come home and be treated with such disrespect, we got no parades, we got nothing.
My father was an integrationist, and he was raised in Harlem. But because he felt so strongly about integration, he wanted our family to integrate a town. And so we became residents of Norfolk, Connecticut, the only black family in the town. It was not a case of diversity being welcomed in the community. It was pretty hostile. So racial slurs were the norm. Being ignored in school was the norm. Walking down the street and being yelled at was the norm. And they say what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. So to grow up in an environment like Norfolk, yes, it had its challenges, but then it also gave me a lot of strength to be able to go anywhere in this world. I grew up with a father who was a soldier. I always saw him as a soldier. He told me that if I enlisted in the Army National Guard, I would be able to travel and make new friends. I was not thinking about being a soldier from the standpoint of fighting in war. I was thinking about the opportunity to travel and make friends. And then I knew that my tuition would be paid for school. And so that was what I was looking at when I joined, not realizing the gravity of what it means to be a part of service. And it was a different situation because we were the first class of women to be admitted to military police. So in some ways, the drill sergeants didn't quite know what to do with us, what the limits were, etc. We trained with the Marines, and the experience was one of being pushed beyond what I thought was my limit, finding out that I had more strength than I could ever imagine I had, able to endure the 25-mile march, being able to endure the discipline required of military and what it means to learn the trade, how to use the various weapons, how to set up bombs, how to set up mines, how to throw hand grenades. I have no regrets because it actually strengthened me and gave me the confidence to be able to be in a variety of situations without fear, to be able to push myself beyond what I think I could do or can do. As a woman in the military police going in for training, it was clear that we weren't really wanted. We were seen as sort of disposable people, or they didn't think that much of us or that we would be that much. It was always the challenge of more being a woman than it was being a black woman. I don't think I fully realized that opportunities were limited for me as a black person. But now as I reflect, I realize that there weren't black people in the unit with me that were in leadership, so many of us didn't end up moving up the ranks. And I noticed, in retrospect, that my black brothers weren't getting promotions either. It wasn't necessarily talked about, and the way that works, you're not being promoted, you end up feeling like there's something wrong with you. That's why you're not promoted, not that the door is closed to you.
I was actually adopted at age 5 by my parents, Don and Sharon Steinley. So my father was white, my mother's black, and so I do identify as a person of color. When I enlisted in the Navy in 2010, it was the United States Navy Reserves that I enlisted in. There's this kind of old school theory that reservists are just reservists. They do their 20-year careers of weekends, 20 years of weekends, and then they retire. In 2012, I was tagged for deployment. And this deployment was for Afghanistan. You're in a foreign land, you're in a uniform, you're surrounded by folks that want to do you harm. Our primary mission at that point in time was FACSEC, which is Facility Security and Detainee Operations. So it was a lot of time on Bagram, on base, not a lot of trips outside the wire during that particular deployment. So I came home from the Afghanistan deployment, and that was that. I was now a veteran. As my civilian career is rising, and as I am being promoted and taking on more responsibility at work, I'm still in the Navy, and I could get deployed at any time. So I discovered that I was tagged for another deployment. This is my second deployment now. This is longer. This is 10 months boots on ground. We used to say this to each other all the time in the Navy. Navy, right? N-A-V-Y. never again volunteer yourself, right? And while I was in the Navy, I volunteered myself a lot. And we arrived in Africa, in Djibouti. That's when we learned that we would be leaving Djibouti and heading over to Somalia. All of our operations were done at night. I forgot what daytime looked like for the most part, and it was 5 months of that. So there's a psychological toll, there's a very real danger toll. The military was there, CIA, FBI. I was just exposed to so much in that period of time, how to conduct myself, being a critical thinker, a critical listener. I mean, these are all skills that you're learning. There's this one photograph of me at the end of my Afghanistan deployment receiving my awards. And the presenter, he's a one-star general, he's black, and it made me proud to get my awards from him. It represents celebrating black excellence. From one person of color to another person of color, we all walked away from that deployment understanding this is really what the service can be all about, and how high the stakes can rise to, and how, 1 minute you may be on a, at a drill weekend at Groton Submarine Base, but 2 months from now you could find yourself standing in the middle of a field at 2 in the morning in Somalia.
I graduated from Southern Illinois University in 1964 and got a job with Brunswick Corporation in Chicago. It took me a couple months actually, because I was living with my aunt on the west side of Chicago, and didn't learn until later that that zip code was Redline. And so a headhunter advised me to use my Springfield, Illinois address, and almost immediately I got a job. So I think it was right around Thanksgiving, it might have been a few weeks before or after, I decided to go down to the recruiting station in downtown Chicago and volunteer for the Army. I didn't want to wait to be drafted because I wanted to go to Officer Candidate School, so I had to take the exam, and I got in. My brother, who's a year older than me, got drafted soon after I volunteered, and once he got in, he volunteered for OCS. So by the time he got to Fort Benning, I was an upperclassman, and I loved that. I loved giving him orders and having him do push-ups, whatever. So yes, my brother was there. I was promoted from second lieutenant to first lieutenant on the plane to Vietnam. My colonel said, or actually the pilot said, could Second Lieutenant John Motley come forward? And I did, and my colonel pinned the first lieutenant bars on me. And as I went back, I said, First Lieutenant John Mott is returning. There were enlisted men who did not want to respect my rank. And somehow or another, some folks thought you could put in front of some terrible statement, with all due respect, sir, and that would be okay. So I remember one time a sergeant said, with all due respect, sir, go F yourself. That did not end well for him. There were some out-and-out racists there. Confederate flags, I almost took them for granted, there were so many. When we went to the field, there was none of that. No racism, no Confederate flags in the field, but at home base, it all was there. So when we arrived in Saigon, to be frank, I was scared. Then they put us on trucks to take us to our first base, and they gave us a rifle and 1 round of ammunition, which I thought was the craziest thing, but I think it was just a psychological thing that we had 1 round of ammunition each. So I felt a little better because that indicated to me it must be a very safe zone. I trained every single person in communications for the entire battalion, so I knew them all by voice. One time I was just walking past the headquarters, and I heard a voice on the radio that I didn't recognize, and they were not following protocol. So I immediately went in and I realized what was happening. There was an impersonator trying to lure a helicopter that was bringing food and supplies and weapons and ammunition, trying to lure them down, and I immediately got on the phone and said, called the call number of the pilot and said, "This is '06, pull up, pull up." That's not my man. And he was very calm. He said, "Roger that," and he pulled up. So I saved lives that day.
In my 8 years in the Navy, I didn't ever set foot on a ship, one time. All of my time serving in the military was boots on ground. They called us sand sailors. Your experience in other cultures, meeting people from other cultures, the languages that you're exposed to, the food that you're exposed to, the sights, the sounds, the existence, all of it matters. You take that with you everywhere that you go.
A bunch of GIs, this was in the middle 60s, late 60s, and so all of the black GIs kind of hung out together. And we would go to an orphanage to help kids, just us, and bring them toys and that kind of thing. And it was just a joyous time, and it helped go back to that locker of kindness and goodness that you had locked away, so you could tap into it. And that was, of all the things, I guess that's what in the service I was most proud of, that we didn't have to do that. No one directed us. No one suggested it. We just did it. Just sat down, probably half drunk, and said, we should go to an orphanage. And we found one. That was a good thing. The orphanage, huge number, or half of them, were biracial. It was, you'd see little blonde-haired, blue-eyed little kids. Looked like some little white kid in any place, and there they were. Or a little brown kid that you'd see anywhere else. There they were. So that was a part of the impetus too, that whether they were little white kids or little brown kids or little Asian kids, they were all there together. And we gave to all of them.
When I would go through the villages, talk to some of the Vietnamese people that spoke English, one lady, the old lady, called her Ba, and I used to smoke a pipe. And she would tell me, she said, "Tobacco is no good. Tobacco is no good. Try my tobacco." And I'm like, "I don't want your tobacco. Try it. And every day she would say it. Then I said, "Okay, let me try your tobacco." Okay. She gets it, put it in my pipe. I light my pipe up. Now I'm like, boom. I'm like, whoa, what in the world? And I'm like, whew, she's trying to kill me. I'm staggering already. I go into our little hooch. And the guy that barrels, "What's the matter?" I said, "That bar out there trying to kill me." Lock and load. Where everybody's low, they're going to shoot. Well, one guy had enough sense to say, "Let me see your pipe." He smelled it. He said, "It's pot." I said, "Pot?" I said, "Yeah." Now I'm paranoid. I'm like, oh.
Had a little side gig where I cut hair. Among the black soldiers and black NCOs, I think that was kind of my in. It's like, wow, Doc can cut hair. And Doc listens to the same music that we do.
We had AFN, Air Force Network, so they played regular music, like, we would play soul music, whatever it was going on at the time. Might have been like a year or so behind, but, we got those musics, and then we could get music from home that people would send us. So people send us cassette tapes at the time. Then we would have the cassette tapes, and then at the PX, which was the public exchange where we bought things from, they would get, music in that we could buy. So we had regular U.S. music while we were there.
When we felt safe enough, we would get together at night, sit in our bunker in a hole that we had dug in the ground, and we would talk about our home, where we were from, the music, and we would play Motown. I would play Motown, and it was the Temptations, the Miracles, It was the Shirelles, it was the Supremes, Gladys Knight. Those were, and again, we did that to kind of to get out of that war mode for a little while and just be in our minds, be back home, safe.
I did go see James Brown. James Brown did not travel with, this is so remarkable, James Brown did not travel with the USO. And he didn't because they wouldn't fund him. And so James Brown paid for it himself and came and performed. I was not a James Brown fan before that, but became a James Brown fan then because of what he did. So that was probably the only show I went and saw. Most of the other U.S. shows, you know, Bob Hope and all that, really wasn't for us. I mean, it wasn't. There was no, you know, he never brought anyone black with him. Yeah.
I love this country, even though this country hasn't treated me. I love this country more and better than this country has treated me.
We had one of our individuals that was with us in basic training came from, we used to call it Beaver Creek because she came from Beaver Creek, Ohio. And once her parents found out that she was going to be with other black girls, they wanted her out, you know, to get out. But she enjoyed it. We enjoyed her. So she ended up staying.
This hat is 4 years old, and that's when I started wearing it. I'm going to tell you a secret that I also wear this hat for protection. People treat me differently with this on. When I'm stopped by the police, and I am, when I have this on, I'm treated differently than when I'm like this. So now, I wear it for protection.
As a woman, it was very challenging because it was a very sexist environment. We were told that women had to decide what they were going to be, a bitch, a dyke, or whore. Well, I'm not gay, so I can't go that route. Being a whore means using my sexuality to try to get ahead. Some women did, and I didn't see myself using that tool. So I adopted the mode of bitch. In other words, if you mess with me, you're going to be messing with a fiery somebody. So that was the way I survived, by being a little feisty and keeping people away from me, because sexual harassment, we didn't even have the term. It's just the way it was. They're going to try to take advantage of you, and some women were actually raped because it was not a place that was prepared for women.
So the closer I got to coming home, the more anxious I was about going on combat missions. And I think it was about 2 weeks out, you never had to go on another combat mission. When I got off the plane, I kissed the ground and called my mother to say I'm home. One of my biggest regrets is that my brother and I were both there for overlap for 5 or 6 months. I think the damage it did to my mother, I greatly, greatly regret.
When that plane took off, from now, I'll never forget how quiet it was. And it wasn't until the pilot announced that we had left Vietnam airspace that it erupted. It erupted. And when we finally got back to Seattle, Washington, Tacoma, Washington, and that plane landed, we were home. No one's there to greet us. No one's there to direct us. All we had, just like we did when we got there, was each other. And we literally walked each other to their departure points. And it was just, We were alone. We were alone.
There is just nothing that I've ever experienced that matches the level of connection that you'll have with a person that you're serving with in the trenches.
Your first sergeant, your commanders become like your parents. All the troops are your sisters and your brothers, and you all build, bonds around each other. Everything is so competitive in the civilian setting, but in the military, you're like, you have each other, and that's all you have. So you gotta build a bond. You gotta trust each other, you gotta work with each other, because no matter what happens, that person has to be for you and you have to be for them. So there isn't a lot of color or gender or sexes. When you out on a battlefield, it's just about survival.
To put it in starkest terms, we are trained to be killers. We were not deprogrammed. The whole reorientation took 2 days, which I think is woefully inadequate. I don't know if people think enough about the aftermath of war, that there are a lot of lost people after that. I've been fairly lucky in that, my PTSD I guess it's always been there, and from time to time, but last couple of years, it popped. But there are others who suffered a lot more on a daily basis or weekly basis from when they left, and that's sad.
Hearing cars backfiring or something, I'm jumping down on the ground. When I got back home, I was drinking every day. I'm drinking gin, vodka, anything. And then one day I'm starting to think, I said, what in the world am I doing? I better go to work. Let me go back to work instead of hanging out drinking every day, So I went back to work. Oh, man.
And it's not only the soldier, but then it's also their family, their children, and their partners as well endure this person that comes home who is not the person that went off to war.
And this is my first day home, first night home. Something was going on out on the street. They had a jackhammer going. And when I first heard it, I just remember instinctively, I rolled off the bed and rolled somewhat under the bed and got into a firing position. And my mother heard me when I hit the floor and came in. And when she said, what's the matter? And I said, nothing, Ma, nothing. I'm okay. And she said, no. She said, you're going to the VA.
The person that helped me most was my wife, who I met and married a little over a year after I got out of the service. Profoundly patient with me. I remember when we first got married, she couldn't awaken me because I'd be in a panic. The moment she touched me, I would be frightened or jump, and so she would turn on a light or something to awaken me. But she went through all of that, and I thank her for that, and every other spouse that had to endure the frailties of their spouse from the difficult things they experienced.
I think today, where there's 23 veterans every day commit suicide in this country. 23 veterans a day. We all left in pretty good mind and body. But like I said, when you come home from war, you're different. You're different.
The sight of a homeless veteran begging for food is revolting. It's easy to fix. Nobody should be hungry. Nobody should be homeless, etc. But especially those who have served and risked their lives, they're owed more. And I wish we would fix that. Enough of the words. We need action. We need to do it.
As much pain as I got out of the service, I learned so much and became who I am. And I love me. I love me. My limits were tested in the Army, both physically and emotionally. That never could have happened anywhere else. Being a middle child, I always thought of myself as just being average, and 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 I'm a nerd, and being a wallflower. And it was in the Army that I became a leader of men. And it surprised me.
I think it helped me manage people better, and I think it helped me lead people better as I pivoted back from being deployed, still being in the Army, and then when I left the Army, being a manager of people and being a leader of people. So that was an important lesson that I learned.
One thing that I learned was basically you don't give up. You know, if you want to do something, go after it. And don't let somebody tell you, oh, you can't do this. You can't do that. And you go in there and you do it. In most cases, you could do it.
There are lessons I took from the Army, period. Live up to your word, loyalty, take care of your men. They were all men then, but take care of your people, and respect for authority.
I am proud of the me I became through the experience of being in the military. I have no regrets. I'm glad my father made up a story to get me in, because it's probably one of the best things that could have happened for me, to give me personal self-discipline, tenacity, to know what resilience is, to find ways of building up my health so I can endure whatever might come in my direction as something for leadership. And the military definitely prepared me to be a leader that could take on any kind of challenge and all kinds of different people.
I feel like everything I've learned throughout my career in the military really has done nothing but make me a better leader in the civilian world. You can really take what you've learned, take who you've met, your contacts, your network, take those lessons, take that knowledge, expand on it, continue it, the regiments you learned, the styles of living that you've learned, habits that you've picked up, take all of that. That's all free. Take all of that and apply it to yourself. Remain consistent, and you'll be surprised what you're able to achieve. And I think that's really, I'm very thankful for my time in the military for those reasons.
When things were going well, when we were achieving things, morale was good. But there were times, when someone you knew died, that it wasn't so good. And, as much as you wanted to separate yourself and put that feeling in a locker, you couldn't. I've never talked about this. And that suddenness hurts. That just final. And this, if I fell away from God at any time in my life, I couldn't answer why. There's no answer.
Faith and the military do go together quite well, because many a soldier is praying in a foxhole. So that goes without saying. I think with faith, it's the way to endure all that somebody might encounter in military service. It's a strengthening piece. It's also a way to be healed from what you encounter in military service.
As physicians, we decided we were going to get together once a day and just talk about some of those issues that conflicted us. Who do I prioritize if someone's coming in? That was a lot of blood today that we saw. Or, for instance, one very surreal moment for me, again, during the ground war, there were precision strike in Iraqi armor vehicles from behind. And, there was still, smoke and the smell of flesh, and that was very hard visually to see and hear and smell. And so we needed to heal.
It's hard to forget some of the things that you've seen. It's really hard to forget some of the things that you've done. And it's really hard to forget some of the things that you've been exposed to.
I always think about when I was in Korea, my first assignment in Korea, and we had lost a couple of our veterans. One of them was in the Army, the other one was in the Air Force. And they were, still kind of hard for me to talk about.
When they were building the wall in D.C., I used to go down there once a month, watch them put the wall up, you know. And I would look at the names of the guys that I knew, you know. It don't make sense. Why are people going to war to do what? To kill each other so they could say, oh, I got this land, or I took this land. I said, they need to get all these people that want to go to war, let them get together and kill each other and leave the young men and women alone. Let them live their lives. So when I came home, I protested the war.
I think that if more women were in leadership, we might not be trying to kill people as a solution for one nation against another. I think that the inclination for those who are mothers and women is to find a way to get along and let all of our children live.
There's enough food this earth produces to feed all of humankind, but it doesn't. Period. So the question becomes, what can we do to prevent war? Stop being greedy.
Why is it that we're so concerned about white children maybe being, you know, a little emotionally upset over the sadness of our history? I think we need to tell the story of this nation from some different lenses, because many of us were taught a history that isn't true, but it fueled our ability to be, for example, soldiers, to hate the other, because we were taught a history that led us to believe that others were actual enemies worthy of death. So as a child, learning about the Pilgrims, sitting at the table with the Native Americans, and then later on hearing that the Native Americans were savages that needed to be killed. No, that's history from one particular lens. These are human beings who had their own homes and they were pushed out of their homes. Why wouldn't they want to try to protect their home or land?
People who were enslaved were the losers in battle, and then eventually it became racial when, you know, with the whole slavery trading thing was refined by the Portuguese and Spanish and later the Northern European countries. So the raid on Africa during that period, and the displacement, and later the racism.
I've been to war. And there is no victory. No one wins. There may be a new policy, there may be a new state, there may be a new nation, there may be a new leader, there may be a new this or a new that, but that's temporary too, until the next war. So there's never any victory, really. It's just whoever is stronger in that moment takes the battle, but the war rages on.